Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 24th episode of Conceptualism. I'm happy to have with me here Alia Jeraj, who is a singer, writer, and educator. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I wanna start by asking you, um, about your practice and what does it draw from? What are you inspired by? Um, and and what kind of what kind of things do you do in terms of singing, in terms of writing? Like what are your like genres, or what are your areas of interest?
Yeah. So um like where do I start? So as a singer, I was actually my background is in Western classical singing, so like opera, art song, from Europe mostly. And that's what I went to college to study. And sort of as I was moving through that education, I was just getting more and more disenchanted with that world. And I still I love that genre. I love so much of that music. But I think so much of the culture of classical singing and its audiences and how it's currently performed are so or became just so unappealing to me. And also I felt like I wasn't, I didn't see myself reflected at all. Like I went to the University of Minnesota, and I think in the entire 4 years I was in the program, there were maybe, at least as undergraduates, I think there were four of us who were women of color singers.
Mm,
And just, yeah. And so I wanted to, I was starting to explore like what it meant to be Indian, and I'm mixed. So my dad's family is originally from India. My mom's family is, white American, the mix of various European countries. And so I was starting to want to explore like the half of my family that is not represented in mainstream art, mainstream culture, mainstream education. Um, and and then I was really disenchanted with okay, so I guess I should say like I went from that like kind of classical singing to then I started singing with some collectives who did more like new music and experimental and improvisation, and I was really drawn to aspects of that, and also aspects of it were really just the specific culture that I was participating in. I also didn't love and didn't feel seen. So lately, I've been moving towards exploring and trying to learn and study folk music from India. And I think what really appeals to me about folk music is this idea that it's for everybody and everyone can sing it and everyone should sing it. And yeah, I think just like as a singer, as a classically trained singer, I honor and respect the work that goes into being a singer and being able to sing certain styles. But I hate that it's this gatekeeping thing that stops people from singing, because I think as humans, like we're meant to use our voices, we're meant to use our bodies. And I just think that everyone should sing and everyone can sing. So that's why folk music is really exciting to me. So that's kind of been a little bit about my journey and kind of where I'm at now with singing.
mm.
um yeah.
And well, that's really beautiful, that you want to be part of a tradition that's sort of inclusive and kind of allows for anybody to participate. And that's really interesting too, because I find that a lot of amateur choirs are actually really interesting spaces, because there's
Yeah.
there's that like community spirit of like, you don't have to be the greatest singer to be part of the choir. um you know and it's just the joy of singing that brings these people together. And
Right. Totally. And there's so much research that says that it is good for us. Like it is good. There are measurable health impacts when we sing with other people regularly.
Yes.
And
Oh
so
yeah.
it's like it's not only good for our spirits, it's good for our bodies. It's, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It releases dopamine, which is the same thing as, when you eat food, or when you have sex, or when you run, when you do exercise. Like, it's the same response. And so, it could help people with depression, it could help people with all kinds of mental illnesses, but also physical illnesses. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you have MS, for example, or some other illness. Like, it could be really like a great way to connect people you know
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just, yeah, I think everyone should sing, everyone can sing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there shouldn't be this barrier to entry, which is what you find in a lot of classical music circles, or in a lot of like intellectual music or whatever. There's this barrier to entry where it's like you have to have a certain qualification or a certain amount of training or whatever before they're going to let you go on stage and perform. And um like,
Right.
yeah, that kind of gatekeepery attitude, like, I've always really like fought against that. And not just in music, but like in everything, like whether it's as a writer, whether it's like, because of your sexuality, or as with the whole race issue of not being brown enough, not being black enough, whatever that means. So like, these are all things that people are very gatekeepery about. And I think it's not really correct. I don't think that it has a place in our society, especially not the way it's currently done. Like, it's good to have distinctions, it's good to have, like, I guess, identifiers, but like, the way that people currently do it is just really like, it's very uninclusive, and I don't like that.
Right. Right. And I think, yeah, I think that's the thing. And just a thing that I've really been thinking about in conversations with friends is I think, um, there's and many of my friends make things,
Mhm.
like I made these earrings, and I have friends who knit and embroider and do just all of these like beautiful crafts. And one of the first things you people say to you when you say like, oh, I make things, they say, oh, do you sell them? Can I buy them? Do you have an Etsy? And it's like, it's this idea that anything we do, we have to make money off of, and to make money you have to do it at a certain level, right? And so I feel like that has permeated into the performing arts, like singing and dancing, where it's this idea of like, oh, if I'm not good enough to get on a stage and sell tickets, I shouldn't sing at all. And it's like, I feel like I I just like I love this idea of doing things like singing or dancing or making crafts or knitting or whatever it is, just in the space of your own home because you enjoy it and it brings you joy. And and it doesn't have to be at any type of level, or it can be like, it could be the most incredible level, and it still doesn't have to be a thing that is used to make money.
Yeah.
I guess is the root of it.
Well, I think that's so important that you brought that up, because I think all these practices, all of these artistic practices, actually started out as community practices, not as ways to make money, not as something you would monetize, but as something that you did for the love of it, for the passion of it, and it's a community practice. And then out of that became this more and more sort of specialization, monetization, the kind of like,
Right.
this is what I do as my career. And
Right. And not to, and I also want to say like artists should get paid for what they do, like, yes. And it's like artists should 100% get paid for the work that they do. And we should be able to do things just because they're fun and not for the purpose of making money. Like, can we have both worlds?
yeah, I think both worlds do exist and should exist. And yeah, and I would say, like, there is a place for monetizing, folk art or community art or whatever, like you know, not that that should be the reason that they're made, but like let's say I don't know, there's a community choir that's doing a performance, you know, like, and
Mhm.
sometimes I point out that, you know, that maybe at least their expenses should be paid, you know, if they're going to be putting on a
Mhm.
performance, you know, something like that, where maybe they're not doing it
Right.
for the money, but at least like you should, you know, if they're going to be giving you some sort of service or they're going to be, you know, participating in your event, you should at least take care of them in some way, shape, or form to show them that you appreciate what they're doing, you know.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with, you know, like if you gave your the earrings that you're wearing to somebody as a gift, you know, I'm not saying they
Mhm.
have to give you a gift back, but there'd have to be some way that they're showing the
Like a
appreciation
thank
for.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think, and I think that's a really interesting thing, like where we acknowledge somebody else's effort or somebody else's time or somebody else's art. And I think that's pretty important too, you know, that idea of acknowledging people for the
Hmm.
work that they're doing.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Um, so I wanted to ask you about your pronouns. So you identify by she and they pronouns, which is
I
interesting. Uh, and like I also identify with he and they pronouns. So, you know, some, like we were talking about this, like sometimes it's a he they, or it's a he day, sometimes it's a they day, but you told me like for you both exist simultaneously, and it's like you always have both identities, like, you know, in play.
Yeah, yes, I think it's pretty recently that I've started at least kind of like publicly using they pronouns. Yeah, I don't know. I think femininity and being a woman and being raised a woman, being raised a girl, like socialized in that way, is really important to me. And I think especially, you know, going into adulthood, I've started drawing a lot of power from the feminine and started, I think I spent so much of my teenage years kind of like pushing it away and like, you know, not being a girly girl because that was seen as weak, right? And so I've found myself really start to reclaim that and like reclaim the color pink. um and yeah, and so that feels very important to me and very much a part of my identity. And then also at the same time, I think there are all of these ways in which the traditional um, markers of femininity don't feel good to me, or I push back against actively. And you know, I think aspects of that come from how I physically present, and I think aspects of that come from um, you know, just the choices I make and like trying to just push back against many of the stereotypes of, you know, what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a feminine person. um, and so it's felt like they them pronouns are not my only pronouns, but those also feel good and they feel um, yeah, fine. And I think it's sort of that like the mixing of the two, and yeah, and holding both of those things of like celebrating the feminine, finding power in that, having that be an empowering identity, and also I think pushing back against some of those stereotypes. And also I think for me, embracing they them pronouns is just a way of kind of pushing back against the gender binary, because I think I would love a world in which just, you know, there was no binary and everyone could just use they them pronouns, or just use like a singular pronoun that was not attributed to any type of gender. Yeah.
Well, and I think if we lived in a world where there was no binary, or there was no, you know, male, female, everybody was, you know, they them, or everybody was, you know, two spirit, or whatever. um I mean, I think it's interesting because the reason that these identities have come to light or come to play has been because there's that distinction, because there's the male, because there's a female. Without the distinction, suddenly there wouldn't be a need, or there wouldn't be a reason to have a
Right.
they them, or a two-spirit, or any of these things. So it's interesting that the boundaries, or even the boxes that we make, they kind of they create like a friction, or they create a boundary, or something that we push against. But if that didn't exist, then we would have no reason to push, and then maybe,
Right.
the whole thing the whole thing would be just, the dynamic would be so different, and we wouldn't, I mean, reality would be so different. So,
Right.
like, I think what you say about reclaiming the sacred feminine, reclaiming the color pink, and being a girly girl, and whatever, all these things, that are looked down upon, I think that's quite beautiful and powerful, because I think healthy femininity and healthy masculinity are perfectly acceptable, and healthy. It's just, we have to sort of think about these things, and I'm happy that you're thinking about it, because, like, that, I mean, that's really interesting. And and like, in your writing, or like, in your writing practice, like, do you address some of these issues of race, of sexuality, of politics? I mean, I know you have, because, like, you wrote this incredible letter, which, I think was an outgrowth, or like something that happened as a result of the Ismailis for Social Justice group, um, or maybe it was your own initiative, but then it was partially claimed by ISG. I'm not sure how it worked, but anyway, you can tell me. But I think that was so powerful, that you wrote this document, and that you did it in such a clear and articulate and strong way. Like, you really, you know yeah, you did something really beautiful with that, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much. Um, yeah, so my writing practice, I guess kind of started I mean, I've always loved writing and journaling, but in college, I began writing opinion columns for my university newspaper, which was really interesting because I would write usually 2 a week. And so twice every week, like, I had to have that I had an opinion about, and like a strong enough opinion that I wanted it to be in this paper that, circulated among our university, but also just among the Twin Cities community here. And I had to stand by those opinions, like I wrote them and my name was attached to them, and actually my picture was attached to them. So it was really interesting, just like walking around campus and being like, I wonder if anybody reads them, but I wonder if anybody reads them and like really hates what I say and like sees me walking. But yeah, so that was kind of how I started. And then once I graduated, I started writing for just various publications in the Twin Cities. And the pieces that were most compelling to me and that I enjoyed writing the most were ones that talked about art practices or art experiences or artists who were like either pushing against the norms of what art was doing, or using their art or an art experience that was a call to action, or making a statement, or connected to the idea of social justice. And so I think to me, writing has always kind of been a tool to speak to people. And I think just telling stories, I think, is one of the most powerful things that we can do. And I think it's just one of the most powerful ways that we can relate from human to human, is for me to tell a story, and then for you to find a part of that you can connect to and relate to. Yeah, so that's sort of how my writing journey happened. And I've realized, and I realized this again more recently, that when something makes me really angry, writing is one of the places I turn to. And I think, one, it's a really good just venting space for me. If I write in my journal, it's a place for me to just get out whatever I'm feeling without it actually having to go anywhere. but then it can be really powerful to take those emotions and put them into something that can go somewhere, like that letter. And so it sort of happened as a response of really intense anger to a text I got, and then I didn't know where the letter should go or who it should, like, I knew I wanted someone to read it, but I didn't even know kind of who those people were that should be the ones to read it. And so that's where the Smileys for Social Justice group came in. And yeah, I think it kind of just began, like, folks asked to read it and I posted it and they asked if they could send it to friends. And I said, sure, why not? And then it just circulated around. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess to answer, I'm trying to remember what the original question was, but I think
I love the tangents, the meandering. I mean, it's beautiful because I find that I do this all the time, and actually the most interesting conversations sort of happen, once we're off on like all these weird tangents, and then we're like, so where did we start? And it's like it doesn't even matter because like the conversation we had was so fun anyway and so like meaningful.
right.
But I think you did answer the question actually, because I was asking you about your practice and like what it's inspired by and what it draws from, and explaining that that when you're angry or when you're upset about something, that writing actually helps you process it, and so in that way, I mean, I also think music in a way does that for me because it helps me. It's like my own form of therapy where like I'm able to process the things that maybe words can't really articulate,
Mhm.
because like sometimes it's just raw emotion, and I think writing also does that, where like sometimes I don't even have to write words. I can just write nonsense, gibberish, and
Right.
I have a gibberish journal where I where like I write just all kinds of weird little nonsensical things, non sequitur things, and at some point I think I want to publish a book of this nonsense, of this gibberish.
I love that.
Like John Cage actually published a book which was very bizarre, kind of like all these weird sentences strung together that were kind of picked by chance, and just kind of these really obscure passages that mean nothing,
Sure.
and
Sounds
or
like John
or
Cage.
mean everything depending on how you interpret them. but
Right.
but I think these practices, whether you want to call them art practices or life practices,
Mhm.
I think um they help us process and deal with the you know with the I don't know what the right word is, but like I wouldn't say struggles, but struggle is not the right word. The
I think
Anyway.
you could just say with life,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just with life. Yeah, that's yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, with life. I was trying to think of of this descriptive word, and sometimes when you think of a word, it's like on the tip of your tongue, and then it disappears.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lost somewhere in your brain, and then a couple of hours later, while you're doing something, it's like that's the word that I was thinking of.
Yep. Yep. I know that struggle.
So what artists or what thinkers or what sort of who are the people you kind of look up to, and that could be either like
Mhm.
mentors who you've worked with like personally, or even just like I don't know, like people that you've kind of admired from afar.
Yeah. Um, wow. Okay. I think um, the writing that's been really inspiring to me lately, I just finished World of Wonders by Amy Nezukumatatio, and she just writes so beautifully about, it's like a book of essays, and each essay is titled after a species of plant or animal. And so her that writing, and then um, Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass.
Mm.
And both of them, I think what's been very attractive about them to me is they both have such a solid scientific knowledge of these plants and of these animals that they're writing about, but they write about them so beautifully and so artfully. And I don't, science is not a subject that comes easily or naturally to me. Like I'm a math girl, but I'm not a biology kind of human. And so it makes it really accessible to me, which is so exciting to get to learn about. And yeah, and I think just like gives this kind of life and spirituality to, you know, the living world around us, but that's based in this, you know, other scientific knowledge. And I love how both of them, I think, pair really evenly the weight of, you know, kind of Western scientific knowledge with the weight of the like spiritual emotional connection. So that's been very, very inspiring, and it makes me want to learn more about the plants around me, which has been really fun. And then I think musical inspiration, I grew up on Joni Mitchell, and she is forever a favorite, forever a love. You know, if I could tell a story with like a tenth of the way that she can, I will be so happy. And then I've recently been connecting to some in the Twin Cities community, just some artists, and I've started taking some voice lessons from this really beautiful singer, Ritika Ganguly. And that's been just like life-giving and so wonderful. And we've, you know, found a way to do it safely within the pandemic, which is just a miracle. Yeah, so I think those are kind of the big ones right now.
Well, you know, I want to share this story with you of, you know, I've always loved Prince, and
Mm.
kind of looked up to his, you know, his practice, and just the, you know, the eccentricity, and you know, all the, you know, all the things that he would do. And he was a huge fan of Joni Mitchell, and he would send her these, you know, fan letters, you know, that had all these dotted I's with, you know, hearts and stuff, and the people like her, I think the people that read her mail, they thought it was some lunatic who was writing, so they never actually passed the letters on. But like, but but apparently Prince was like enamored with Joni Mitchell, and like was a huge
Wow.
fan of her work.
Oh, I love that. And you know Prince is from Minneapolis, right? Like Prince is from
Yes.
where I'm from.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
So it's interesting, like, you know, artists who are like, who are working in, you know, on these really, you know, beautiful planes, I think they gravitate towards each other, and they find each other, and they respect each other. It's kind of like, you know, Bruce Lee was a huge fan of Muhammad Ali, and like, you know, and it was
Yeah.
like all these, like, you know, all these people that are like, you know, at the real, you know, at the bleeding edge of their craft, you know, because they're so ahead of their times, and like they're working on such a high level. They actually they seem to like have this like kinship, because they know what it takes to like get there, and like to do the work to get there, and like the struggle. And so yeah, I really wish that Joni Mitchell and Prince had collaborated, because my God,
Oh,
that would have been so incredible.
that would have been so cool. Wow. You know, the world probably could not have handled that kind of collaboration. Wow.
You know, it's interesting that you're talking about this intersection between science and you know, spirituality and emotion,
Mhm.
because you know, a lot of the findings that scientists are just discovering now, things about quantum mechanics, and you know, and superpositions and juxtapositions, and you know, all these things that are becoming more and more evident about our universe. They're things that spiritual people have understood for such a long time, you know, and not by looking outside or measuring, but looking inside, you know. And so it kind of goes to show you that really, you know, the inside and the outside, they're sort of the, you know, the two sides of a coin,
Right.
you know.
Right. I remember, so my dad was a veterinarian, and he really believed in, you know, just science and education. And and he was also deeply spiritual. And so, you know, he was a smiley, but he was also a bit like very drawn to Sufism. Um, and I've been going through his bookshelf lately, and there are just all these books about either the mystics of the Ismaili faith or the mysticism in Islam. Um, and I remember being a little kid and kind of asking him and being like, I mean, Dad, like you're a scientist. How do you believe in God? You know, like there's no, like where's the proof, and like how can you be a scientist and believe in these things that need like very hard evidence and believe in Allah and like pray. um and I honestly, like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember him just expressing to me that he could hold both of those things and that he didn't see them as two separate things. And yeah, and eat like, you know, kind of using science as a way to explain religion, but also using religion as a way to explain science sometimes, you know, like both of those things can exist. And yeah, and so I feel really blessed that I got to kind of have those questions, I mean, not answered, but be able to like voice those ideas at such a young age and have it validated that like, yeah, and sometimes they don't make sense. Like sometimes what science says and what your religion says are two very different things. And so then how do you like find that synthesis? You know, how do you bring those two things together? Um, yeah.
And it's interesting because the world is full of paradoxes, and I mean even human beings were, we're so full of paradoxes. And 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 so it's interesting when people, well, and this is the other thing, that a lot of people sort of think that religion and spirituality are the same thing, and I like to point out that they're not, you know
Right.
because religion is the rules and spirituality is that individual journey, that individual search that sort of liberates you from that cage, you know
Totally.
and you look at, of course, I mean, you talk about the cage, you have to talk about Rumi. It's like, you can't avoid that. Because I mean, Rumi was in this cage where he was an academic, he was a scholar, he was a jurisprudent, whatever, and he had, was very highly considered in society. And then Shams at Tabriz comes along and basically shatters that, like
Right.
shatters that illusion, shatters the cage, forces him out of this shell that he's been living in, you know, forces him to live the faith and forces him to live the beauty and the poetry, rather than the shell or the outside,
Right.
and it's interesting because I'm sure you know the story where where Shams basically goes up to Rumi, and Rumi's reading this really heavy volume, and Shams asks him, what are you reading, and Rumi, being arrogant, says, you would not understand. And so Shams responds by taking the book, throwing it into the fountain, and then Rumi, in a panic, goes to rescue the book from the fountain, and it's completely dry, and he says, how'd you do this? And then Shams says, well, now you wouldn't understand how I did this, you know and and
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like these, these levels where, like, no matter how intelligent or knowledgeable you are, there's a certain, I mean, there's a certain power, that intuition, and that inner child, like that inner child that knows all the answers to all these things, that, when you embrace that, then suddenly there's a power that comes from that surpasses everything that you can get from just thinking about it, or get from just,
Right.
philosophizing about it,
Right.
so I guess in that way, your dad was probably, you're probably, mm, like, probably trying to get you to think about that, like, don't see both of the religion and the science as these cages or these limited things. See them as these all-encompassing, coexisting, and interrelated, interdependent, linked things. and
Right.
and I think that's a really healthy worldview, because when you start to, when you start to see the interdependencies and the linkages that happen, that between all these things that we call the human condition, or even just the universe, then suddenly, we're able to draw, from these different patterns, and from these different, things that somehow don't seem related at first glance, but when you really think about it, are, like I said, the same side of the coin.
Right,
Like
right, totally.
kind of like how I'm sure your practice of singing and writing inform each other, and you're a better singer and a better writer because you do both these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I'm talking too much. So
No, no, not at all.
because and this is the thing, like it's not like when I started the podcast, I knew that I didn't want to do like a conventional interview. I kind of wanted to do
Mhm.
more like a talk between friends, you know.
Yeah, this is that.
So in your writing, do you write mostly in prose or poetry, or is it both?
Yeah, so it's mostly so the kind of the official genre. Well, no, that's not true. I guess most of the writing that I've done that I is like published out in the world is like not quite journalism, but more in that realm where it's like writing about a thing or a person or an event, kind of doing like profile work without much of my own commentary or sometimes without any of it, you know, as much as that can be true, because I also believe that there's no such thing as objective writing, and any words that I choose are my commentary.
Yes.
But I'm working right now on writing a show. So there's a theater here in Minneapolis that every year they do this program called the Naked Stages Fellowship, and they choose 3 emerging artists to create a solo performance piece. And so we are tasked with writing and creating and then performing in this piece. And they usually happen in December, and ours is actually going to happen next December of 2021, which feels so far away. But yes, I'm working on writing that, and it's kind of the first time that I've done more of a creative writing thing that other people will experience, which is terrifying and so exciting. But I think it's more in the world of like creative nonfiction. I don't necessarily want to call it like memoir because it's not all about me, but I think like telling real stories in an artful way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Well, and
yeah,
it's so cool that you're doing this performance art piece, like, or this theater piece. Like that's, I love that. Like like I love theater, especially like theater of the absurd, or like, or abstract theater, where you kind of, you don't have so many props, you don't have like a plot per se. It's like, it's this, it's like this, kind of like, impressionistic painting or expressionist painting, where like it's so open to interpretation and meaning, and like they're not telling you to think anything, they're not spoon feeding you a narrative. It's up to you to, to decide, one, if there is a narrative, or two, if you just want to kind of exist in this ambiguity. And I've always loved ambiguity, because I think like,
yeah,
the gray areas are so interesting. And like, even for the people that I brought onto the podcast, like I've tried to bring in people that are in the gray areas, that are like in the less, like the
yeah.
less defined spaces, who are kind of working in these like areas. And I love that you're doing this one person, like this one person theater show. That is so cool.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for saying that, because I feel like I just need to constantly remind myself that sometimes it's more compelling as an audience member to not know what's going on than to understand everything. And I remember, so back I think 2016, I created this like immersive theater experience with some friends, and it took place in a house. And one of the coolest things was that, so the audience, there were a few parts where all of us were performing at once, and that was the only thing going on, and so everyone in the audience was there. But then there were also moments where 2 performances would be happening simultaneously in 2 different rooms, and so the audience had to choose which room to go to, and they could leave and they could switch, and they could do whatever they wanted, but they could not experience every single thing that happened. And I remember as we were creating that, just feeling so like I felt so strongly that we should do that and that we should not let people see everything. And so I've been forgetting that as I've been writing this piece, and I think I've been really worried about like, are they gonna understand it? Are they gonna get it? Like, am I giving enough information? So it's really helpful for you to say that. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I think, well, um, I think this idea of of telling everybody, or giving everybody all this information, I think it's kind of like a Hollywood thing or a Bollywood thing where
Mhm.
like they basically they want to spoon feed you this narrative. But like, when you look a lot of indie films, a lot of expressionist films, some of the work that Andy Warhol did, where he just filmed the Empire State Building for like 8 hours, you know
Sure.
and or was it 8 hours? I'm not sure, but a long period of time. It could have been like almost a whole day, 24 hours, but I'm not sure. The idea was that the film was basically the weather changing around the Empire State Building,
Oh, cool.
right? So, and Brian Eno has done a lot of work like this, where he does quote unquote video art, or really still videos of like clouds moving, and like, and just like, and so when I look at this kind of artwork, to me it seems almost more reflective of the kinds of things that we observe as, just by living life, rather than, being told this is what to think. Because like, we all live we're all constantly improvising, and we all constantly live in a gray area, and
Right.
somehow I think defining things too much actually takes away from the abundance that comes from, allowing people to, to just be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's totally right. And also, like, I've just been thinking a lot about, the story that I'm writing is, it's about me and it's about my family and history and memory. And I've been really thinking about, like, how do I tell the story that is so personal um, in a way that people can relate to? And I think that's part of it, like giving details, but also, you know, leaving details out so that people can kind of fill in their own details and their own stories and relate to it in that way.
Yes, and that actually brings that's a beautiful segue to the next point that I was going to make, which is that uh, I had someone who I really respect say, it's not just what you say yes to or what you agree to that defines you, it's the stuff that you're able to say no to. And
Mm,
having the luxury to say no, the ability to say no, I don't want to take this project on, or no, I don't want to do this. That's
totally.
so important.
That so I think after I graduated from college, I was just like totally like saying yes to any project that people had asked me to do, and I learned so much from that. And I think, part of it was just feeling like I didn't know anything and wanted experience and wanted any experience, no matter what it was. And then after a couple years, I was kind of like, I felt myself get to the point where I felt like I could be more picky and I knew what I liked doing and what I didn't. And there were certain things where I was like, I'll do that, but only if you make it worth my time, like only if you're paying me a decent amount of money. And it is such a power. It's so empowering to be able to say, like, one, just like, I know what I want and I know what I want to do and how I want to spend my time. And then two, like, that I can advocate in that for myself and I can say no.
Yeah,
Yeah, so powerful.
absolutely, it is. um and speaking of power, and particularly, power structures, I think like like um part of deconstructing, or sort of, taking back power or reclaiming power, is to acknowledge the power that things have over us, or we're kind of like examining that really, critically. um and like, for example, with language, like reclaiming the queer community reclaiming the word queer, which was a pejorative, or for example the b word, or like other words that have been used in a derogatory way, like sort of reclaiming the power, um and that's just one form of like of power struggle or one form of oppression. It happens like on all levels. There's the government level, there's the interpersonal level with our friends, with our families, all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of interesting because, and I wanted to ask you about your sort of your politics, like in the sense that like some artists will claim to be apolitical, but like even not making a political statement kind of ironically is making a political statement.
Right. No, I 100% subscribe to the idea that the personal is political.
Mm.
That everything we do, whether we intend it to be or not, is political, either by affirming the status quo or by pushing against it. So yeah, I'm a political person in just about everything I do. And I try to be conscious of that. And I am not, always even close to getting it right most of the time. But it is a thing I think about. And I like, this necklace says Alia in Arabic. And I got it for myself in 2016 after the presidential election. And a big part of why was because I was like, I know when people see me on the street, they don't see me and think Muslim because, I don't wear hijab and I don't dress modestly all the time, or they're just like all these other, like, I have tattoos, I have piercings, like all of these ideas of what people think it means to be a Muslim woman, I don't subscribe to. And so I wanted it to be a way, like, this is my kind of resistance of being like, hey, like, this is also what a Muslim woman can look like. And so then also, like, hey, you, when you're talking about like the Muslim ban and you think you're talking about all these other people, like, you're also talking about me. So I like, anyway, that's another tangent, but yes, I'm a political person. I think everything I make is political. I really do not believe in the idea of like objective journalism. And I'm not a journalist, but even like the journalist adjacent writings I've done, I try. I don't believe anyone can be objective because we're all humans and we're not living in a bubble. And so I think pretending to be objective is even more harmful than just like writing a piece and being like, hey, like, I wrote a piece about this really cool opera that happened here a few years ago. And I was like, I'm writing this piece as someone who is trained in opera and like didn't like a lot of my experiences. And so like, that's the bias I'm coming to. And so then as you read it, you can take it and say like, oh, okay, so that, she's maybe jaded and that's why she wrote this. Like, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting, like when you're being so open about like where you stand, and yeah, it's interesting because some people play the cards close to the chest. Like my dad is really interesting in that, like, one of the ways that he retains power is by sort of not telling you what he thinks, and by like sort of withholding information. And like I've been really thinking about the ethics of that, like the people that choose to be upfront and sort of just wear their heart on their sleeve and just tell you what they think. Like, one, is that any less powerful than holding the cards back, or not telling people what you think? And then also like if you're in a position of power, let's say you're a politician, or I don't know, you're in some position of power, is it ethical to not make things that affect other people's lives known to them?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess just like for me personally, I can say the communities I'm in are kind of insular and kind of bubbles where it's safe for me to, express these things so loudly. So that's also a privilege I have, right? That like I'm not actively putting myself in danger most of the time, or like any more danger by making the choices I make. So I think that's important to acknowledge. I think that idea of, is it more powerful to hold your cards close or to show them, is an interesting question. And I guess it reminds me, and maybe this is kind of tangentially related, but of this idea that like not showing emotion is a form of power, and that showing emotion is a weakness. And I think that's the thing that I really rail against. And I think I think showing and sharing how you feel is such a powerful thing, and a thing that takes so much strength. And so I'm wondering if kind of that same logic can be applied to like political views, which I think are often fueled by emotion or have emotions tied to them. I don't know.
Well, I try to explore these kinds of questions, in my work. And also the question, obviously the question of the ego, like, where as a composer or as a writer or whatever, there's that self that's attached to, whatever you're doing. And so one of the ways that I try to, maybe strip away the ego is, I'll give up control, I'll surrender. I'll leave the decisions to the people, to the performer, or to the conductor, or even to the audience, because like to me actually the audience is just as much involved in the making of the music as the musicians. So like changing sort of the idea that the audience isn't a passive participant, or like kind of like a like taking a back seat. I kind of like the idea that actually it's all a collaboration. It's what there's just the levels, right? There's the different levels. There's how much of an active collaboration or how much of an active participant you are as opposed to a passive participant. And I kind of try to change those dynamics, through the performance of these experimental works, where like, for
That's
example,
really cool.
for one of my pieces of music, I asked the audience, to all come up on stage, one by one, and do a gesture, like a gesture, and then the musicians would interpret that,
Oh, that's cool.
So it was kind of like if you've seen interpretive dance, but like nobody, like, well, I don't know if anybody was a trained dancer in the audience, but like that,
Right.
but like it was open to literally everybody, and it was kind of like a movement slash yoga slash experimental sound art piece, and it was like it was like I said, it was in all these gray areas. And so I was like, who's the composer here, who's the participant, who's the observer? Like it was totally like a mind fuck. It was like everything was like reversed. It was like kind of like in the Matrix, where like Neo is like told by Morpheus, you're breathing in this space, and you're and because you're breathing, and you're assuming that you need to breathe in this space, you're losing your power, because in that simulation you didn't have to breathe. So,
Sure.
so it wasn't a requirement.
Right.
And so like I like these kinds of things which question or poke fun or poke holes into these things that we take for granted and call reality.
Yeah, no, that's really cool.
Yeah. And I think we all are constantly participating in these kinds of social experiments, even with our friend circles.
Right. Yeah, I was having an interesting conversation with my partner and his roommate, and we were talking about anarchy and just like different political systems. And I was like, well, okay, so like they live in a house with 3 people. And I was like, this is kind of an anarchist space in a way, right? Like you have not, like no one is coming and saying like this person does the dishes and this person, cooks and this person watches TV. Like the 3 of you have made this space and you've decided it like based on what the 3 of you value. And so I think you're right that like especially at those like small, very micro community levels, we're doing that all the time. We're playing with negotiations of power and losing power and sharing power. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, human beings like to surrender. It's just
Mm,
I don't. I mean, like, if you're living in a big city, and you're walking across the street and you surrender, I mean, you're gonna die. You're gonna get
right.
hit. You're gonna get hit by a car. It's like, it's dangerous to do that in the city. But I think there are places and times where you can surrender. And one of the things I'm really interested in is creating spaces where people can surrender. So,
Mm,
so and for me, I think Jamaat Khana should be one of those places, and it really unfortunately isn't, because it's not a safe space for everybody, and there are politics, and there are issues, like, and to give you a very concrete example, there was this older gentleman, if you can call him a gentleman. I don't think it applies in this case. He basically told this trans woman, that she shouldn't sit in the female section of Kane,
yeah.
and and basically publicly embarrassed her, and
Mm,
like it was horrible, like it was so bad, and I got really mad, so I actually kind of I wrote a letter, to the management, like the upper management, like I think the president of the council and the chairman of the LIF at the time was
mm,
Mohammed Ibu. So I wrote them a letter and I said this happened, and this person is picking on people,
mm,
who are younger than him, particularly people under 25, and also
mm.
people that are queer and trans and whatever. And I said this is happening in Jamaat Khana, which is supposed to be a safe space for us
Right.
all to come together, and to put down our walls and just you know be vulnerable in this space
Mm,
together. And
right.
unfortunately, that when these kinds of things happen, it totally it messes with that idea of a safe space. I mean, think about this, okay? In a didar, or like in a mulakat, all the people sit together. There's never that segregation of,
Right.
so I never understood why we do that in the regular prayers. Like, why,
Right.
why are we not rethinking this? And then of course there's the idea of being two spirit. The imam always says, I'm your mother, spiritual mother and father, you know
Right.
so, like,
Hmm.
if that isn't being two spirit, or that isn't like a queer identity, I don't know what is.
I have never considered that, and I love that.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. Yeah. Jamaat kind of should be a space where we can surrender, and it is. It's really upsetting when it's not.
yeah. But I
Yeah.
guess I guess we all have to kind of work to change that, because I think, I mean, if we change, that's the thing, right? Stuff happens over generations. So,
Hmm.
if we start, doing that work, and pass along the values to, our children and whatever, like eventually at some point, it hopefully the culture will change, and it'll evolve, and it'll become more inclusive, and become more, you know,
Hmm.
tolerant.
And I think also a thing that I've found that has just been really inspiring to me, um, especially over the past 4 years living down here in the United States, is not letting go of, but shifting focus from changes at a macro level to changes at a micro level, and thinking about, well, okay, so me as the human I am probably cannot do anything that affects what happens in the federal government, or that affects, the US Council for Jamaat Khana.
Oh, you never know.
But
Yeah,
I
and
mean, I don't know.
look at
I
look at
don't know.
this letter. Look at this letter that you
No,
wrote.
I know. And I'm not saying that to disempower myself. Um, yeah. So it's possible I could, but as an individual human, it's like doing something at that level is more out of my reach, I'll say. But what I can do is, like, I can change, I live alone right now, but like if I lived in a house, like with other people, like, affect what is the community like in this household, or on my block, how can I make community with just the row of houses that is right around me. And I think especially in the Twin Cities, there's been so much really, really cool like neighborhood organizing, community organizing, like city council elections in Minneapolis are maybe more important than presidential ones, at least in the communities of Minneapolis that I'm involved in. And it's like doing that really intense work on that community level. And, you know, I think for me, it's like rather than hoping for like change will happen incrementally over time, hoping that like faster change will happen at a smaller scale, and then maybe that scale will slowly widen. And so I think that's been really inspiring for me.
Well, it kind of reminds me of a quote, which is, yesterday I was clever and I was trying to change the world, and today I'm wise and I'm changing myself.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I like large scale change maybe has to happen slowly, but we can make changes in our immediate area
Yeah.
quickly. I think at least some of them, I think it's possible. So
Yeah, definitely. When you got your tattoos, did they have any particular significance or meaning?
yeah, so I have a few, and they all have a story attached, and some of them are um, much deeper and connected to people who have died, and some of them are connected to specific experiences, and some of them are connected to just like beautiful dear friends that I have who are still very much with me. So there's a whole spectrum of levels of meaning and kinds of meaning, but yeah, there's a story for them all.
I've always been really afraid of needles, so that's,
Mm,
I mean, like even getting my ears pierced was really scary for me,
yeah, that's fair.
you know.
Needles are scary.
But at some point, I really want to get like a tattoo of like, like a cymatic frequency, like, have like a composition that I made, tattooed onto my body, you know. I think
That
that would be
yeah,
kind of cool.
that would be cool. And I think if you use like a tattoo machine, you can kind of pretend it's not a needle.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Although, there are older ways of tattooing where they pierce your skin one thing at a time, and it's like it's way more painful, and some people do that just because like they're actually like, to them the pain is kind of cathartic, or like, it actually, like, I don't know, it's an experience for them, you know.
Yeah. No, I've experienced that. And I think there's something really beautiful about the hand poke tattooing, and um the connection that it makes, at least for me, what I felt was like the connection between me and this artist who is like, yeah, just like repeatedly like taking a needle and stabbing me. It's like the trust that you have, and it also just takes longer.
Yeah.
And I think there's more, it feels more intimate to me. And then I think also the relationship with this idea that, like by doing that, I am changing a part of my body. And that is also true, of course, when you have a tattoo that's done by machine. But I think, yeah, there's something about the hand poke experience that makes that, I don't know, the like tangibleness of the change that's happening more present, maybe. Yeah, but they hurt more and take longer. So
Now, it probably takes a lot of courage to do something like that, you know, to subject yourself to something like that.
I think just like trust in your artist also.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Um, well, and it's interesting too, because like there's other times where being an artist, or you know, you have to kind of trust the other person. Like you know, if you're drawing somebody nude, for example, like that takes such a level of trust and respect, and like
Totally. Or like dancing together.
yes,
I have friends that are dancers, and they've my best friend is a dancer, and she has danced in these pieces where just like the physical intimacy between bodies is there, but also the pieces are really emotionally intimate. And they've just talked about, you know, the incredible amount of trust that they have to build as a what's the word, a cast of dancers. That's not the right word, but as the group of dancers who are performing.
yeah, whatever, yeah,
Yeah. And yeah, and then they also have to trust the audience with that, you know, and that, I think that's often taken for granted. Of like, if you're doing something super emotionally or physically vulnerable on a stage, like that is placing trust in the audience that they'll hold that space for you, at least, right? Like you're not trusting that they'll love it or that they'll think it's the most incredible thing, but that they'll allow you the space to be that vulnerable.
yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you for sharing your insight.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been really lovely.
Well, and hopefully we'll get a chance to meet once COVID is over and maybe collaborate. That would be so fun.
Yes. Oh, that would be so fun. Maybe even we can figure out a virtual collaboration.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.